Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astral Club. This is the Loosh Collectors Questions and Answers. Before we get into it, just want to mention Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the work of Astral Club, you can do so on Patreon. And when you join, you get downloaded episodes that you can put on your podcast. I think there's around 100 right now. I still have a lot more to do. You get commercial-free advanced videos. And of course, there's an email where we can talk back and forth, share experiences, what have you. Next up, private lessons. If you'd like to talk to me about astral projection and how you can begin projecting, just contact me. In the description, there is an email, and I'll send you the information you need. And of course, the link to Patreon is in the description as well. Well, I've been holding on to this Loosh Collector information now almost for the last 3 decades. And I knew you guys would have excellent questions, excellent input. I can always count on Astral Club members to make me think that, gee, I wish I'd thought of that, or, ooh, that's a good point. And you constantly give me ideas for new episodes, and I don't have to pay you, so I think that's great. But seriously, I think it's worth going over some of these excellent questions and statements, and of course sharing my reactions as well, because I think they're timely. I think there's wisdom there, and I think we can all benefit from it because the episodes are certainly a little out of the ordinary. So let's get started. Before I get into the first question, I just want to kind of put things in perspective a little bit. When I visit other planes or other planets, I am on someone else's home turf. I try to act diplomatically because, you don't go into a stranger's house or even your friend's house and start telling them what the house rules are. Okay, that's not something you do unless you want to get tossed out real quick. So I always try to be diplomatic, and that might come off, I think, to some people as perhaps I'm not fighting hard enough for Earth. Look, if I'm flying a flag out there in space, time, dimensions, it's a flag with a blue-green planet on it called Earth. Earth is my first loyalty and always will be, and the human race. But I think sometimes we can get a little confused. We have been on the top of the civilization, or top of the pile here on Earth for, well, tens of thousands of years now, until the last Neanderthals finally died off. I mean, we know once upon a time there were many human-type species out there. The Denisovans, for instance, I already mentioned the Neanderthals, and there's the hobbits. There's a wide variety of other beings, tool users with intelligence not too dissimilar from us. But they're dead now. We're the last standing. So I think it's very easy to think that since we're the number one power here on Earth, that other races, other beings, look at us the same way or give us the same amount of respect that we believe we are due. So I just think we need to understand that that's not necessarily true. Just because we think very highly of ourselves does not mean that everyone else does. Now, I think we've accomplished a heck of a lot in the last 5,000 or 10,000 years. But we've also made a lot of mistakes too, and let's be honest, we've spilled many rivers of blood in the process. I hope we're getting better, I really do. But like I said, at the end of the day, no matter what, it's ride or die, planet Earth and humans. So I just want to make sure I make that statement. Okay, the first comment about the whole Loosh experience and the whole idea of Loosh being harvested. I'll use the word that Monroe used, and certainly the word that I think best describes how they described what they were doing. Anyway, horned tree ant with a bit of wry humor encapsulated the relationship between humans and the Loosh collectors this way. They said it's a bit like a potato coming to you while you're gardening and saying, "Why do you take from us? What right do you have to take something from us without our consent?" And then we, of course, as the gardeners, well, we certainly pause and we're probably a bit shocked and a bit perplexed because we're not used to our vegetables talking to us, much less questioning our ability to harvest them. But how they finish here is, well, this is my garden and I am the gardener. Full stop, end punctuation, and continues with the pruning. So certainly I like examples that bring things down to earth, and naturally I know that we don't think of ourselves necessarily as potatoes, but because we consider ourselves so much more intelligent. But keep in mind, is there races and powers in our galaxy who have been around a lot longer than we have and have achieved intelligence to an extent that makes us look very small. And then, of course, you're dealing with very alien type creatures like the Loosh collectors. I describe them as some sort of plasma being. That was the best way I could describe them. Hugo Batista hated to agree, but he said that the gardener was probably right from the standpoint that it was his garden and that's how he saw it, and what he was taking, I don't think he ever questioned. And it's tough to make that argument. The only argument we can do is say that, well, we're humans, hear us roar, everybody better respect us, or else. But in the example of the Loosh collectors, I mean, you don't want them to call us on the bluff, because or else what? These are beings that are so alien from us that they make the Greys and us seem like brothers. You're dealing with an entirely different alien race that comes from, who knows, a culture that is so dissimilar from ours that it's amazing that any communication is possible. Mike Pelosi came back and he said, "I might have tried letting the Loosh collectors know that humanity has been misled throughout its existence, and we've been manipulated by other races for to their benefit, and ended up with negative things happening to us." And he wondered if that would perhaps have helped these Loosh collectors have a better understanding of why we are the way we are at this moment, and perhaps they would see us in a new light. And then it was afterwards. I think Michael thought that maybe he came off a little sharp, a little critical. Now, I didn't see it that way, but he then went on to say, "Look, I understand you had to be careful, you had to be diplomatic. You were in the danger of being on the wrong side of an argument on somebody else's home turf." And then he went on, of course, to thank me for sharing the knowledge and the experiences. Don't worry, Michael. I can take some criticism, particularly when I'm in a situation like this one. I wasn't prepared to meet the Loosh Collectors, much less end up being drugged into their dimension by accident. My first impulse was to try to get out of there and just go back to my body. But then my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to stay and see if I could get some information from these entities. However, I'm sure there are people out there who probably could have done a better job than I did, maybe ask more insightful questions. What I can tell you, though, is that talking with this one particular unit was very difficult. I had the feeling that I was getting 10% of the information and 90% was going over my head. And I compare it to imagine being lost somewhere in Venezuela, and all you have is a smattering of what you remember from high school Spanish. That is roughly what I was experiencing when I was dealing and asking these questions and getting these answers. I seriously doubt that I could have put together an eloquent enough response or a defense that would have instantly convinced them that the millions of years they've spent collecting this energy source, which they must value very much, that I would be able to talk them out of that. Keep in mind now, if you remember your a little bit of high school Spanish, you might say, me llamo Ricardo. But how are you going to make an eloquent statement to somebody who's a native Spanish speaker, such that you will cause them to discard all beliefs that they've had for their entire existence or millions of years, and suddenly decide to look at things that they've always looked at one way very differently? I would suggest that that'd be virtually impossible, doing that with your broken me llamo Ricardo level of language skills. But hey, if anyone else ever gets unlucky enough to get drugged to this dimension, I suggest you use all your skills, be diplomatic, and perhaps your telepathic ability with these creatures will be superior to mine. And I'm sure there's folks out there who are like that. But unfortunately, I may not be one of them. I do the best I can with what I have to work with. Havoc said, there are different types of souls on Earth, incarnating here, so the plasma being looking at us as if we were all the same was perhaps a tactic to put me, or perhaps even the human race, in our place. I think we're making another error here, an error that's easy to make for a race that is very insular, that doesn't have any contact with any other typically intelligent beings or races. We assume that the differences that we see in one another are equally discernible to aliens, especially aliens as these plasma beings. It reminds me of when I was reading about Japan and when Europeans first started coming into contact. And it started with Spain and Portugal. And of course, these were Roman Catholic countries. And so when they introduced Christianity to the Japanese, they introduced the Roman Catholic variety, and they even claimed that the Christian church was one, and that everybody was on the same page. Now, nothing, of course, further could be the truth. There had been the Protestant Reformation. And when other countries started showing up, like England, for instance, they started meeting Protestants. And of course, the Protestants and the Roman Catholics hated one another. And they couldn't understand how the Japanese were having such a hard time telling them apart. However, from the Japanese standpoint, they both looked like foreigners to them, and foreigners who didn't bathe as often as they should. So here we have humans having trouble telling the Europeans apart, the Japanese versus the Europeans. And we're all humans. Now you're talking about these plasma creatures whom are extremely alien, who I think maybe I got 10% of what they tried to relay to me. And somehow they're supposed to really care about trying to figure out the differences, but also assuming that it's clear to them. Look, there's differences in corn cobs in a farmer's field. There's no two corn cobs that are exactly alike. But when it comes time for harvesting, they get harvested. The farmer is not looking for a particular cob or trying to make a determination that this cob, while looking basically the same, although of course it's not exactly the same, saying, look, whatever, I don't see the difference. It's a corn cob and it's getting harvested. I think that's a pretty accurate way of trying to explain how the Loosh collectors look at the earth and look at the Loosh that they collect, not only from humans, but from other living beings here on the planet. Let's not forget them in our concern with us and our race. But like I said, it's easy to think that alien beings are going to think like you. It's just like if you watch Star Trek. I grew up watching Star Trek. And the alien of the week pretty much was, for the most part, sometimes they were a rock, sometimes they were a gaseous cloud. But for the most part, they were Klingons, Romulans. They looked pretty much very close to humans, but with different ridges on their brows, for instance. And despite the fact that they spoke different languages, which luckily we can understand through the magic of Trek, but that they all pretty much thought the same. They all had relatively the same weapons, relatively the same desires to conquer. The Federation conquered piece by piece and by offering things to other races. The Klingons and the Romulans preferred to use a little bit more aggressive means, but at the end of the day, they all acted pretty much the same. But these were writers who were writing for TV audiences, and they knew that if they spent too much time getting too alien, they'd lose people, because it's hard for the average human to try to think like an alien. Because how can you think like a being that you have no clue as to their thought processes, their culture, their history? I mean, they may even have different senses. There's probably intelligent races out there that don't have eyes. Maybe they use echolocation. I can tell you that if such a species existed, it would look at the world and the galaxy in ways very different from the way we look at it. So I just think we need to keep that in mind. Okay, I have a lot more questions to do, so I think we're going to have to do a second episode. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure that bell is solid so you get all of the notifications on Wednesday and Saturday when there's new episodes. And of course, questions and comments. And don't be afraid, to be a little critical, or be nice though, but be a little if you want. But share your ideas, share your thoughts. You guys are some of the best people, I think, on the planet Earth, and at least on YouTube, which is, being the best on YouTube, I know isn't the highest praise in the world, but believe me, you guys are great. Okay, at any rate, as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.